Morning light filtered through broken blinds, striping dust across the old Sunrise Motel sign, its glow spelling only one word: rise. Rachel Turner stood in the doorway, 7 months pregnant, one hand on her belly, the other gripping a duffel bag that held everything she owned. Her last dollars had bought this place, her last hope. A warm draft brushed past her boots. The cat, Milo, paused before room 6, tail stiff, ears forward. The brass handle was warm, as if someone had just touched it. She told herself it was nothing, until she caught her reflection in the cracked glass behind her. And for a moment, another woman's face looked back. What secret could this forgotten room hold? And why did it feel like it had been waiting for her? The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, a fine drizzle painting the cracked asphalt silver as dust settled over the highway. Rachel Turner pulled her old Chevy pickup into the gravel lot of the Sunrise Motel, a forgotten property that leaned at the edge of town like a memory everyone wanted to forget. At 33, 7 months pregnant, she carried the kind of exhaustion that lived deeper than bone. Her light brown hair was tied messily beneath a hood, her once clear green eyes shadowed by nights without rest. She was tall and slender, her figure softened by pregnancy, yet her movements held a quiet, determined grace, the kind of poise born from enduring too much and complaining too little. The motel stood before her, 8 rooms in a single row, the faded yellow paint peeling like old wallpaper, the sign half lit, humming faintly in the rain. She'd bought it for less than the price of a used car, a desperate gamble to start over after her divorce. Her ex-husband, Grant, had been a man of charisma and cruelty in equal measure, the kind who smiled for neighbors but let silence rot a marriage. When he left her for someone younger, Rachel sold everything and drove west, the baby kicking in her belly as if pushing her towards someplace new. The door to the office creaked open. Dust spiraled in the beam of her flashlight, catching on a spider's web stretched across a crooked "welcome" sign. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten coffee. She rubbed her arm for warmth and murmured, half to herself, "It's not much, but it's mine." A soft meow answered from behind a counter. Out stepped a cat, gray with white paws, lean but proud, tail twitching like a metronome. "Well, hello there," Rachel said. The tag on its collar read, Milo. His fur was matted near the ears, one eye slightly clouded, but he purred when she knelt down. "Guess you came with the place." She smiled faintly. It felt good to speak, even to a stray. Milo brushed against her knee as if claiming her already. Rachel spent the next hours cleaning. Each room carried its own scent: smoke, old perfume, damp carpet. But room 6 was different. The door was locked, and a wooden sign above it read, "Do not enter." She frowned, tried the key ring left on the counter, but none fit. Something about the door unsettled her. The handle felt warmer than it should, as if someone had just touched it. She moved on, convincing herself it was nothing. By nightfall, the rain turned into a steady rhythm against the tin roof. Rachel lit a single lamp in the office and sank into the cracked leather chair, rubbing her belly. The baby shifted gently. "We'll make it, little one," she whispered. "Just a few more weeks." Her voice wavered, the loneliness pressing like a hand on her chest. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its headlights washing briefly over the row of empty rooms. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a shadow standing in one of the windows. When she looked, again, it was gone. The next morning broke with pale light and silence. Rachel brewed instant coffee on a portable stove and stepped outside. The rain had left puddles that reflected the sagging eaves and tangled weeds. She decided to check the maintenance shed behind the building. Inside, among rusted tools and paint cans, she found an old guest ledger, the pages yellowed and stiff. She brushed away the dust. Every entry dated between 1975 and 1990, the same name appearing dozens of times in neat handwriting: E. Holloway, room 6. Rachel frowned. Same guest for 15 years? She flipped through, noticing that after 1990, the entries stopped altogether. The last note read, "Checked in, never checked out." The words made her skin prickle. That evening, she sat by the office window, the ledger open beside her. The sky was bruised purple with oncoming rain. She told herself she wasn't afraid, just curious. Still, her eyes kept drifting toward room 6. The curtains there hung still and straight, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was behind them, waiting. She finally stood, grabbing the flashlight and the ring of keys again. Her boots squelched on the wet gravel as she approached the door. Milo followed a few steps behind, tail low, emitting a low growl. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. The lock resisted as before. She tried again, twisting harder. With a soft, metallic click, the door opened. The air that spilled out was cool and stale, tinged with the faint sweetness of old perfume. She stepped inside. The room was almost untouched. A neatly made bed, a small dresser, faded floral wallpaper. Dust lay thick, but on the nightstand sat a glass of water, clear, half full, and still warm to the touch. Rachel froze. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. She turned the flashlight toward the bathroom door. It was half open. A drip echoed from the sink. She took a step closer, heart hammering. Then she saw it. The mirror above the sink was fogged, though the air was cold. Slowly, letters began to form in the mist, as if an unseen finger were writing from the other side. "You came back." Rachel stumbled backward, clutching her belly. "Who's there?" she shouted, but the room remained silent except for the steady drip, drip, drip. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The reflection in the mirror cleared, showing only her own pale face and wide green eyes. She backed toward the door, breathing hard, Milo hissing beside her. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, low and distant. She reached for the handle, but it was already turning from the other side, and then everything went dark. The first thing Rachel noticed was the silence. Not the kind that rested easy, but the heavy sort that made the air itself feel like a held breath. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. A thin blade of moonlight cut across the floor through a gap in the curtains. She stood frozen in the doorway of room 6, one hand instinctively on her belly, the other clutching the edge of the wall for balance. The door she had just opened, no, that had opened itself, swayed gently behind her, creaking like an old hinge recalling a song it once knew. "Who's there?" she whispered, though her throat was too tight to let the words carry far. Nothing answered except the steady drip from the bathroom sink and Milo's distant growl from the hallway. Rachel drew a breath and forced her legs to move, stepping into the room one cautious inch at a time. The air was colder here, as though the walls had swallowed a long winter and forgotten how to exhale it. She could see the same things as before, the bed neatly made, the faded wallpaper, the glass of water still faintly warm. But now the shadows seemed thicker, alive in their waiting. Her heart beat hard enough to make her belly jump. She tried to speak again, but what came out was barely a tremor. "If someone's here, please say something." When she reached for the flashlight, it sputtered, dimmed, and went black. Rachel froze. For a second, only the sound of her breathing existed, shallow and quick. Then a different noise joined it, the faint scrape of something soft against the carpet just beyond the bed. Her pulse climbed her throat. She took one step back toward the door, ready to run when a light flickered. Not the flashlight, but the bedside lamp. It hummed, glowed weakly, then brightened as if summoned by her fear. The bulb's yellow glow revealed the corner of the bed, and a pair of bare feet. Rachel's breath caught. They were small, pale, belonging to a woman sitting perfectly still on the mattress. Her dress was white, but yellowed with age, her hair a dull chestnut arranged in careful curls that seemed decades out of place. Her hands rested neatly on her knees, and when she lifted her face, Rachel saw that her eyes were the same color as her own, green, deep-set, and weary. "You shouldn't have come back," the woman said softly. Her voice was calm, maternal even, but underneath it was a tremor that belonged to someone who had been afraid for a very long time. Rachel stepped back, heart pounding. "Who are you?" she managed. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, studying Rachel the way one might study a photograph long thought lost. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "Not yet." She stood slowly, every movement measured, and walked toward the dresser. Her reflection moved across the mirror with her, though, for a brief instant, Rachel thought the reflection lagged behind, out of sync. The woman opened the top drawer and took out something wrapped in a white handkerchief. She placed it on the nightstand and looked at Rachel again. Some things don't like to be disturbed. Then, without warning, the lamp flickered and died. The room fell into darkness so sudden it seemed to swallow sound. When Rachel fumbled for the door again, the woman was gone. Outside, Milo hissed, tail puffed like static. Rachel staggered into the hallway, lungs pulling in air that felt too cold. The baby kicked sharply, a protest or warning, she couldn't tell. She leaned against the wall, shaking. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations, stress, exhaustion, hormones. But deep down, something older than reason whispered that none of those things could make another person vanish like that. She waited for the world to make sense again, but it didn't. When she finally found the courage to return to room 6, the bed was empty. The handkerchief lay where the woman had placed it. Rachel unfolded it with trembling fingers and found an old room key tied to a faded ribbon, its brass tag engraved with the number 6. Beneath it, a torn photograph showed the front of the motel decades earlier. A woman, maybe the same one she'd just seen, stood by the sign, her hand resting on her stomach. Someone had written across the back in looping script, E. Holloway, 1989. Sleep was out of the question. Rachel stayed up in the office, the ledger open before her, the photograph lying beside it like proof she wasn't losing her mind. She remembered the warmth of the door handle, the words written on the mirror, and now the woman with her eyes. The pieces didn't fit, not yet, but she could feel them starting to form the outline of something dangerous. At dawn, she decided to find answers. There was a diner a mile down the highway, Marty's Place, a squat building with chrome siding dulled by years of grease and gossip. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped in. The place smelled of coffee, bacon, and rain-soaked asphalt. A few locals sat in booths, the kind of men who measured newcomers before saying hello. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with auburn hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and arms dusted with flour, approached with the easy authority of someone who had raised children and outlived her own patience. Her name tag read Betty. Betty's eyes took in Rachel's condition, the swollen belly, the tired face, the tentative hope that comes from needing strangers to be kind. "Morning, hun," she said, voice husky but kind. "You new in town?" "Sort of," Rachel said. "I just bought the Sunrise Motel." The clatter of forks paused at a nearby booth. One of the old men glanced over the rim of his coffee cup, his expression somewhere between disbelief and pity. Betty's smile faltered for half a second. "Well," she said carefully, "that's a brave choice. Coffee? Please." Rachel wrapped her hands around the mug when it arrived, grateful for the heat. "Do you know anything about the place? About who used to own it?" Betty hesitated. She leaned her hip against the counter, towel slung over one shoulder. "I know it's been empty a long time, since the fire. Folks say it's cursed, but you know how small towns are. Rumors grow legs faster than facts." "There was a woman," Rachel pressed. "Evelyn Holloway. Did she live there?" At the name, Betty's expression changed. Her eyes softened, then narrowed, as if balancing sympathy against old caution. "Evelyn, yes. Pretty thing. Too soft for her own good. Ran the place with her husband until—" She stopped, glanced toward the old men who pretended not to listen. "Until she didn't. She was expecting a baby when the fire happened. Some say she got out, others say she didn't." Rachel felt a chill creep along her spine. "No one ever found her?" Betty shook her head. "No, not a trace, just stopped being." She poured herself a coffee and added quietly, "You look a bit like her, come to think of it. Same eyes." The comment hit Rachel harder than expected. She managed a weak smile. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." When she left the diner, the sky was a washed-out blue, and the air carried the scent of wet earth. Rachel drove back slowly, her mind turning over every word Betty had said. At the motel, Milo met her at the steps, meowing insistently. "All right, partner, I'm coming." Inside the office, she noticed something new. The phone on the counter, an old rotary model, was off the hook. She was certain she hadn't touched it that morning. She lifted the receiver. The line was dead. Setting it back in place, she froze. On the pad beside it, a single word had been scrawled in pencil. "Run." Rachel's pulse thudded in her ears. The handwriting was delicate, almost elegant. The same looping script as the photograph's caption. "Who wrote this?" she whispered. She scanned the room, but nothing was disturbed. Only Milo's low growl broke the silence. The cat's fur bristled as he stared toward the hallway leading to the rooms. Rachel followed his gaze and saw the faintest movement, a door closing softly. Room 6. This time, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the brass key and marched down the hall, determination overruling fear. The air grew colder with each step, her breath visible. When she reached the door, she paused long enough to steady her shaking hand. The key slid in easily, as if the lock had been waiting for her. The door opened without sound. The room looked unchanged, but the bedspread had been pulled back, and on the pillow lay a small wooden box, about the size of a jewelry case. Rachel approached slowly. The lid bore the initials E.H. carved deep into the grain. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed lace, was a baby's rattle made of silver, tarnished and cold. She picked it up, feeling its weight, and noticed a tiny engraving on the handle. For my daughter. The baby inside her stirred again, hard enough to make her gasp. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She turned, expecting wind, but the air was still. The lamp flickered once, twice, and then the woman was there again, standing by the mirror. Evelyn Holloway, Rachel could see her clearly now, had the fragile beauty of someone built from regret. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes, skin too pale to belong to the living, yet her presence was not menacing. She looked at Rachel with the tender, exhausted sadness of a mother seeing her child after years of separation. "It's almost time," Evelyn whispered. "You shouldn't have come here." "Why?" Rachel asked, voice cracking. "What happened to you?" Evelyn's expression wavered. "I stayed because she never left. The fire took everything but the promise. You opened the door, now she can find you." "Who?" Before Evelyn could answer, the mirror behind her rippled as though the glass were water. A distorted reflection moved within it. A dark figure, tall and featureless, its outline writhing like smoke. Evelyn's face twisted with fear. "Go!" she cried. The lights burst, glass raining onto the carpet. Rachel stumbled backward, clutching her stomach. The rattle fell from her hand and rolled under the bed, tinkling faintly. When she looked up, both the woman and the shadow were gone. Only the broken mirror remained, its surface fractured into a dozen tiny reflections of her own terrified face. Rachel fled into the corridor, gasping for air. Milo darted ahead, tail low, as if guiding her. She made it back to the office and slammed the door behind her, sliding down the wall until her knees hit the floor. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The word on the notepad, "run," seemed almost merciful now. She wanted to, more than anything. But the thought of the motel, of Evelyn, of the rattle engraved for my daughter, it all bound her to the place like invisible wire. She couldn't leave, not yet. When the rain started again that night, Rachel sat by the office window, staring out at room 6. The curtain inside fluttered once, though no wind blew, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a tiny hand press against the glass from the inside, small, perfect, and impossibly familiar. Then it was gone. The rain had passed by morning, but the clouds hung low and heavy, the kind that made daylight feel borrowed. Rachel Turner hadn't slept. She sat at the office desk, eyes fixed on the broken mirror shard she had brought from room 6. The fractured piece reflected her face in slivers, showing versions of herself she didn't recognize. Milo curled on the chair beside her, his tail twitching in restless sleep. The night's memories still pulsed behind her eyes. Evelyn's voice, the shadow in the mirror, the tiny hand pressed to the window. Rachel's logical mind fought to make sense of it, labeling it exhaustion, hormones, fear, but some deeper instinct whispered that what she saw was real. She glanced toward the hallway. The door to room 6 was closed again, locked from the inside. She hadn't locked it. At 10 in the morning, the sound of an engine cut through the stillness. A car, a dark green Ford from the 90s, pulled up outside the motel office. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was in his mid-40s, tall but slightly stooped, with the weary carriage of someone who had spent too many years carrying things heavier than luggage. His hair, once black, had turned salt gray at the temples. A day's worth of stubble traced the sharp line of his jaw. His coat was military green, the kind you wear out of habit, not fashion. When he entered, Rachel's first thought was that he didn't look like a guest, more like someone who'd come to deliver bad news. "You the new owner?" he asked, his voice gravelly, low but not unkind. Yes, Rachel said cautiously. Can I help you? He nodded once, eyes sweeping the room like a man taking inventory. Name's Deputy Samuel Briggs, County Sheriff's Department. He pulled a leather badge holder from his coat pocket and flashed it briefly. We got a report of lights on out here last night. Neighbors said this place was supposed to be empty. Rachel hesitated. I bought it last week, just moved in. Briggs studied her face. His eyes were pale blue, tired but sharp, the eyes of a man who'd seen more bodies than he cared to count. There were faint scars near his temple, old ones, and a small nick on his right ear, as if it had been clipped by something once fast and close. You here alone? Mostly, she said, glancing toward Milo. Just me and the cat. Briggs's gaze softened a fraction. He looks like trouble, only when hungry. A small silence settled, not uncomfortable, but watchful. Briggs took off his cap and rubbed the back of his neck. Look, ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but you picked a strange place to settle. This property's been on our books for years, technically condemned after the fire. I know, Rachel said, but I needed a place, and it was cheap. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, cheap tends to come with ghosts around here. The word made her flinch, and Briggs noticed. He leaned forward slightly. You seen or heard anything unusual? Rachel hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything, the woman in white, the message on the mirror, the child's hand, but some instinct told her he'd write her off as another fragile woman cracking under pressure. Just some noises, she said finally. Old building stuff, creaking pipes, maybe a bird in the vent. Briggs didn't look convinced. All right, he said. But if you see anything off, give us a call. He placed a business card on the counter. His handwriting on the back was neat, precise. Cell. Day or night. As he turned to leave, Rachel noticed a slight limp in his right leg. It was subtle, like a habit rather than a wound. Something about it made her want to ask what had happened, but she didn't. He paused at the door. By the way, you might want to stay out of room 6. Rachel froze. Why? He looked at her then, really looked, and something behind his eyes shifted from polite caution to memory. That's where they found the crib. Then he tipped his hat and walked out into the gray daylight. The rest of the morning, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the word crib. It echoed through her mind, tangled with Evelyn's face and the rattle engraved, "For my daughter." By noon, curiosity had become a kind of fever. She needed answers, not warnings. The nearest county archive was 20 miles away, in a town called Elridge. The drive took her along winding rural roads bordered by skeletal trees and old barns leaning into the wind. The archives building was part of the old courthouse, red brick, the kind of architecture that looked perpetually disapproving. Inside, the air smelled of paper, dust, and forgotten stories. Behind the front desk sat an older man wearing a cardigan and bifocals, his thinning white hair combed neatly back. His name tag read, Harold Denton, county clerk. He looked up with the patient resignation of someone who had spent decades waiting for the day the world would stop asking him for things. Can I help you, miss? I'm looking for records on the Sunrise Motel, Rachel said, specifically around 1989 or 1990. He frowned slightly but nodded. That'd be the fire, I reckon. He led her through a maze of filing cabinets, each humming faintly under fluorescent lights. His steps were slow but steady. Bad one, that was. Whole wing gone before the fire crew got there. You from the paper? No, I just bought the place. Harold stopped, turned to her, eyes widening behind the glasses. You bought it? Good Lord, they still sell that heap. Apparently. He gave a short chuckle, then sighed. Folks say that fire started in room 6. Gas leak, maybe. Nobody ever proved it. All I know is they only found one body. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Whose? Woman named Evelyn Holloway. Owner at the time. Pregnant, they said. Shame, really. Her husband disappeared right after. Never did find him. Do you have a photo? Harold nodded and rummaged through a folder. He handed her a black and white photograph, edges curled with age. Rachel stared at it. The woman was unmistakably Evelyn. The same eyes, same hair, but the man beside her caught Rachel's attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a face built from charm and trouble. He He wore a mechanic's uniform with a patch that read Grant Holloway. Rachel's breath hitched. Grant. She blinked hard, looked again, telling herself it was coincidence, just a name, just a face that vaguely resembled her ex-husband. But the resemblance was uncanny. The tilt of the mouth, the sharpness of the jaw, even the way he stood slightly turned away, like someone hiding a part of himself. Her stomach twisted. "Do you know what happened to him?" she asked quietly. Harold shrugged. "Rumors. Some say he lit the fire himself for insurance. Others say he ran off with another woman. No one ever proved nothing." He glanced at her belly, his expression softening. "You all right, miss? You've gone pale." "I'm fine," she lied. Back in her truck, Rachel stared at the photo under the weak afternoon light. If Grant Holloway and her Grant Turner were somehow connected, if her ex-husband came from this same cursed thread, then maybe the past hadn't just followed her here. Maybe it had called her back. When she returned to the motel, the air was thick and still. Milo met her at the steps, tail low, ears twitching. He meowed once, sharply, like a warning. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." Inside, the office smelled faintly of smoke. The phone receiver was off the hook again. She picked it up. This time, there was a faint hiss on the line, then a whisper, soft and close. "You shouldn't have left her." Rachel dropped the receiver. It clattered against the counter. The whispering stopped. That night, she sat at the desk with every light on. The photo of Evelyn and Grant lay beside her, along with the brass key and the rattle. Her mind moved in loops, replaying the deputy's words about the crib, Harold's story, the phone's whisper. The motel creaked and sighed around her like an old animal dreaming. At midnight, she decided to face room 6 again. She couldn't let fear keep her blind. The hallway stretched ahead, the carpet soft under her bare feet. Milo followed a few steps behind, silent except for the soft thud of his paws. When she reached the door, the air smelled faintly of baby powder and burnt wood. She turned the key. The room looked unchanged until she saw the photograph on the nightstand. The same black and white picture she'd taken from the archives. Only now, it wasn't black and white anymore. Color had bled into it, subtle but unmistakable. The green of Evelyn's eyes, the pink of her dress, the blue of the sky. And between Evelyn and her husband stood another figure that hadn't been there before. A little girl, about 5 years old, holding a silver rattle. Her face was blurred, as if caught mid-motion, but Rachel's chest tightened at the sight. She knew that silhouette. Then the child in the photograph moved. Her head turned slightly, and though the blur hid her features, Rachel saw the faintest suggestion of a smile. The room temperature dropped sharply. The lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. The sound of soft humming filled the air. A lullaby, the same melody Evelyn had whispered in her dreams. Rachel backed away slowly. The humming grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from right behind her. She turned. The mirror over the dresser was fogged again, and words began to form in the mist. "She's not yours!" Rachel stumbled back, tripping over the chair. The humming stopped abruptly. The light went out. When she turned the flashlight on, the room was empty. No photo, no box, no rattle. Only the faint scent of smoke lingered. She fled to the office, heart hammering, and sank into the chair. Tears burned her eyes, part fear, part exhaustion. Milo jumped onto the counter, pressing his head against her arm as if to anchor her. "What do they want?" she whispered. The cat purred, low and steady, the sound grounding her for a moment. Then she noticed something outside the window. Room 6's curtain had moved again, but not from wind. Through the thin fabric, she could see a soft golden glow, the flicker of a lamp she hadn't left on. And silhouetted against that glow was a figure, small, still, unmistakably a child, standing beside the bed, holding something that gleamed like silver. Rachel didn't move. She only whispered to the empty room, "That can't be her." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she meant Evelyn's child or her own. Burnt as everything else, like the fire skipped it like a stone. The limp belonged to that sentence, she could tell. "You were there," she said, and it wasn't a question. He smiled without teeth, a quick aside that forgave nothing. "I was in academy when the call hit, rode back up. Got this?" He touched his thigh, pulling a guy out who wanted to go back inside for a wallet. Wallets make cowards of sensible men. He shook his head once, a small denial of history, then straightened. You want this open? You call someone who can make it neat. If you just start tearing, the whole thing will sag, and you'll have more ghosts than you can catalog. They found the neat person in the county listings, on a grease-smeared flyer, thumbtacked to the diner's corkboard. Caleb Rhodes, licensed electrician and repairs. He arrived before sunset in a dented white van, with ladders married to the roof and the smell of sawdust leaving a trail behind his boots. 37 by the math he offered, though the beard, full chestnut with threads of copper, made him read older in a way that felt safe. His face held that open geometry that belongs to men raised fixing things. Square jaw softening at the corners, straight nose with a slight bend earned honestly. Eyes the kind of brown that carried flecks of green if you stood close enough to deserve them. He wore a faded navy hoodie under a canvas jacket, sleeves pushed to forearms that earned their keep. There was a nick at the base of his thumb, a crescent pale scar that suggested he had once learned a lesson with a blade and decided not to repeat it. He spoke to Rachel the way a good brother speaks, unhurried, practical, voice pitched to reassure without being condescending. With Briggs he was respectful, a brief nod at the badge, the quick shorthand of men who know grief but don't inventory it aloud. You want careful or fast? He asked, tapping the misaligned seam on the wallpaper. Careful, Rachel said at once. Whatever's behind there, maybe it matters. Caleb hummed agreement. Everything matters to somebody, he said, almost to himself, and set to work. He scored the paper along the liar's seam with a utility blade so sharp it hissed, peeled it back like old skin, and revealed a narrow panel framed with finish nails, hammered flush, and puttied over by someone with patience enough to hide their sin. Briggs held a flashlight, the beam deliberate, while Caleb levered the panel with a slim pry bar, coaxing each nail free without ripping the trim. The wood surrendered with the soft complaint old houses make when you finally understand their grammar. Cool air spilled from the dark beyond. Caleb switched to a headlamp and placed his hand through first, fingers palming the void like a blind man greeting a room. Shallow cavity, he murmured, maybe 4 feet wide, too deep. He widened the opening and then stepped back so Rachel could see. The cavity was a box of breath held too long. Inside, lamb print wallpaper ran in miniature parade, yellow faded to buttercream, each lamb outlined in gray with a ribbon of blue at its neck. A tiny shelf hugged the back wall. On it sat a pale ceramic music box glazed with hairline cracks, the kind of thing older women keep dusted as if memory itself were allergic to neglect. Beside it lay a soft-knit baby cap folded into itself, a shock of singed yarn at the edge where heat had kissed it but not claimed it. And there, pressed against the floor, a space shaped by absence, was a rectangle of less faded wood the size of a bassinet's footprint, as if something had rested there for years, refusing to let the room age under it. It wasn't a closet, it wasn't exactly a room. It was a shrine that had learned how to hide. Rachel's throat closed with a sudden heat that tasted like gratitude and grief braided until neither could be told apart. The lambs, the cap, the air. It felt like a nursery a ghost had trimmed. She reached toward the music box, but stopped 1 inch shy. The memory of the mirror writing made her cautious in new ways. Caleb noticed the tremor in her hand and pivoted the headlamp slightly so she could borrow certainty from light. Briggs, whose face had learned to do stoic things without instruction, let his jaw unclench. Well, he said, a word that did not begin to hold what the moment asked. Well means we're still alive, Caleb replied easily, a mantra he might have inherited from work sites and their near misses. He glanced at the box. Want me to wind it? Rachel almost said no. She almost said let quiet stay. But the lullaby she'd heard in the walls wanted a face. Music wanted a mouth. Do it, she said. Caleb's thick fingers handled the delicate key like a benediction, turned it 3/4, and then the music stumbled into being, a brittle, exact melody. Brahms' lullaby, carrying across a gap of 35 years, as if time could be smoothed with a palm. For a heartbeat, 2, Rachel swore she heard a second line under it, a human voice almost mouthing along, off to the left of hearing where mothers live when they hum to keep themselves from crying. She closed her eyes. The baby turned, answering, and tears found her without asking permission. On the tiny shelf, behind the cap, Caleb's light found a tin toy soldier no larger than the last joint of a finger, lead paint worn to dull patriotic. Tucked below it, flattened behind the baseboard, a sliver of red ribbon held something in place. Briggs, the only one with hands big enough to be gentle like that, pinched the ribbon and drew out a narrow envelope the size of a dollar bill. It had survived because it had learned to go thin. Its cream had browned to tea. On the front, in the same elegant loops that had captioned the photograph, someone had written, "For my daughter, if the door ever opens." Rachel could feel her pulse in her mouth. She did not ask for permission. She opened it. Inside lay a hospital ID bracelet cut and saved, translucent plastic, the kind that bites a wrist, with a flimsy clasp that never quite believes in itself. The label, smudged but legible if you decided it would be, read, "Holloway Baby Girl, 07 1490, Cedar Ridge." Genoers, the date punched a hole through her like a thrown stone through ice. July 14th, 1990, her birthday. Not adoption papers, not a letter. A wrist she might have worn if the world had been made by kinder hands. Her vision swam, the room flickered, the lullaby wound down with a soft mechanical sigh, like something deciding it had earned a rest. Briggs steadied her with a palm to the elbow, the way a brother does when a stare has betrayed you. "Breathe," he said low, a word he spoke like a craft. "In on 4, out on 6. She matched him, almost laughing because coaching breath to a nurse felt like asking the ocean to remember how to arrive. "I'm okay," she lied, then corrected it because the body respects honesty. "I will be okay." Caleb, trying to be present without crowding her, turned his attention to the panel. He had the kind of tact that came from losing people and learning that silence is a toolkit. "We can put this back tonight," he said. "Safe. Then tomorrow I can frame it properly so it opens like it should. Secret doors ought to open by design, not accident." Rachel nodded, as grateful for that thought, a hinge in a world of locks, as for anything she had found. She slid the bracelet back into the envelope, as if tucking a child in. On the back of the paper, the ink had printed an echo of the words from the pressure of the writing. "If the door ever opens," the phrase ghosted itself in mirror like a teaching. They took a break because bodies require water. In the office, Betty from the diner arrived with a thermos of soup, as if the county had phoned her the instant sadness pried aboard up. She was 50-something, auburn bun, loosened by the day, flower-like constellations on her forearms, mouth that did not have to smile to be kind, because the eyes carried the lift. "Don't argue," she said, shoving foam cups across the counter. "I heard you had company and work, and neither feeds you. My boy Marty said the sky smelled like rain again, and I hate to cook for the trash can." She noticed Briggs and her shoulders softened in the way small towns keep fold-out histories. "Sam," she said quietly, the old name they use when they remember the before of you. "You look tired." "I'm collecting it," he said, almost a joke. She turned to Caleb, scanned the beard, the careful hands. "You're new," she pronounced, then decided she liked him because he accepted soup without making a speech. Rachel felt the word new settle in the room, like a saint that had graduated. Betty's gaze landed on the envelope Rachel kept near her wrist, and the knowledge in her face detoured to tender. "What did you find?" she asked, and when Rachel told her, Betty pressed her lips together the way women do when crying would spill a truth that needs to stay quiet. "Evelyn used to tuck little things away," she said. "When her husband got mean, she would hide nickels in the hem of the living room drapes, so there was always bus fare out. She was that kind, prepared for mercy." Betty tapped the counter once. "I'll bring blankets later. This building keeps a chill it has no right to." After sunset, the wind shifted and the motel learned to whistle again. Caleb framed the panel with temporary clips so it could be eased back without damage, promising to return with proper hinges and a thin catch that would hold from the inside. "So you decide what this door does next," he told Rachel, as if she needed to know that choosing was still permitted. He left a flashlight and his cell number written in thick felt tip on the back of a business card, the handwriting tall and neat with the odd flourish that suggested he'd once learned calligraphy from a Sunday grandmother. Briggs walked the perimeter once, a quiet patrol that was more blessing than investigation. Boots whispering in gravel, glance inspecting the corners memory loves to spring from. At her office door he lingered, hat in hand, eyes tilted toward room 6, in a way that meant he would not pretend he didn't care. "I'll swing by near midnight," he said. "Folks who want to cause trouble don't like schedules." He did not say what trouble, or whether he meant human or weather or those other kinds. He had the decency to send a text later anyway. Blue car circling at 11:10. Left. We'll check plates. Lock up. She thumbed back a thank you she did not decorate with punctuation. Intimacy is a kind of grammar too. The motel thinned out into dark except for Rachel's lamps and the stubborn light in room 6 that insisted on glimmering from nowhere. She sat at the office desk with the envelope in front of her, the hospital bracelet haloed by the desk lamp like a relic returned for veneration. She spread the photograph of Evelyn and Grant beside it and hunted the faces for what she had missed. In less forgiving light, the man's similarity to her ex-husband softened to a family resemblance. Less mirror, more rhyme, but the angle of the jaw, the slope of the shoulders, the way the mouth promised things its owner could not deliver, those were all the same. She did not want to believe in blood as a plot device. She wanted adoption to be a rescue, not a reroute. The baby shifted hard and she winced, palm pressed to a curve that had become its own geography. Fear arrived again, in a new shape. If something in this place wanted a child, did it want hers because of who she was, or because the house remembered being denied one? She knew how grief can make an altar of a room. She knew how promises can turn hungry. At 10, the office phone rang once and stopped, an old motel trick that felt like a prank. It rang again. She lifted the receiver and let silence speak first. The hiss was there like the sound of wind on a microphone. Then a voice, woman, soft, refined in a way smaller towns teach their girls and grief removes, threaded the line. Don't leave her alone again. The word again carried a weight that bent the sentence. Who? Rachel asked, hating the shiver that threaded her own voice. The one you were, the woman said, and the line went dead. With the receiver still in her hand, Rachel felt the temperature drop. Her breath smoked and the window fogged from the inside out. On the glass, letters formed slowly, the stroke of a finger not quite aligned with this world. Floor vent. She turned to room 6 because, of course, that was where the instructions were meant for. The vent was under the window, an old square register with filigree iron, paint loaded into its corners by someone who had covered sin with gloss. Rachel knelt, awkward with the belly, Milo hovering, back arched like a parenthesis. She pried the register loose with a flathead and set it aside, dust blooming up like moths. The cavity beneath was shallow, but not empty. She reached in, fingers tasting cold and the particular dry that old houses keep, and touched metal. A tin box waited in the dark, edges worn to bright where hands had sought it before. She lifted it out and sat back on her heels. The lid offered a resistance that felt personal. When it gave, the smell of scorched paper climbed into the room. Ash and library, and something sweet melted, then reformed. Inside, a stack of Polaroids bound with a rotted rubber band. A folded deed with Sunrise Motor Lodge typed across the top, and a second envelope thicker than the first, sealed with a smear of wax that had split. The top Polaroid showed a nursery no camera had taken. Lamb wallpaper, a white bassinet, a music box on a shelf, the cavity as it had been before survival taught it to become a wall. The bassinet's blankets were turned down, and something small lay on them, a hospital bracelet glinting under flash. Another Polaroid, a man's hand, that same mechanic's grease tattooing his knuckles, holding a silver rattle toward the camera as if offering it to proof. Another, Evelyn at the window, cheek to glass, eyes unfocused like people listening for footsteps in a house that shouldn't have any. Under the photos, the thick envelope. Her name, her actual name, was not written there. Instead, to the child born of that night, if mercy arrives. The script was Evelyn's. Rachel slid a nail under the seal, an unfolded paper that wanted to tear from age. The first page was a letter that began without greeting, as if the writer had used the salutation to hold herself together and found it inadequate. I should have left the first time he raised his voice, it read. But we love men in the shape they take in the morning and hope they don't remember how to become the night. The next paragraphs unspooled something like a confession and something like a testimony, a gas leak that was also an argument, a match struck for a cigarette and a slam of a door at the same time, the way blame behaves when houses catch. Then, I thought if I hid your room, he could not take you, and the fire could not find you, and a kinder hour might. If you are reading this, either I succeeded for a minute or I failed at the speed of a prayer. At the end, a line underlined twice. Your name is what you will decide, but I called you Rachel when I spoke to the air. Her ribs forgot their job. The baby rolled as if answering to being named across 3 decades. She pressed the letter to her mouth, and breath tasted like ink in years. Tears arrived. She did not wipe them because some liquids are holy. In the envelope's bottom corner, a smaller slip shook loose. A birth certificate carbon copy, smeared by heat but salvageable. Holloway girl. The father's line blacked by ash. The mother, Evelyn Grace Holloway. Date and hour, 07/14/1990, 3:06 a.m. The hour matched the notch of tired she sometimes felt at that minute of the night, as if the body keeps anniversaries it hasn't been told to celebrate. She wanted to call Briggs. She wanted to call no one. She wanted Betty's hands and Caleb's quiet, and the voice on the phone again, and the woman in white to stay as long as it took. The motel settled. The building made throat noises. Somewhere a pipe ticked, counting. She put the certificate back very carefully, as if roughness could scuff truth. She reseated the vent because covering secrets is a reflex, and sat on the floor until her knees decided to speak and then stand. The office clock marked 11 with a stutter that felt affectionate. She set the letter on the desk and laid her palm on it the way some people pray. The lamps hummed, the hall breathed. Milo jumped to the windowsill and fixed his clouded eye on a square of dark outside, like it held a cartoon only cats were allowed to watch. Far off, an engine idled, low, insistent, familiar in a way Rachel could not place until it did. Headlights rolled slow over the lot, washed the office in pale aquarium light, and paused. The baby pressed upward as if reaching. Rachel stood without telling her legs to and stepped to the window, letter still in her hand. A dark sedan she knew in the way, bodies no old bruises idled in front of room 6. The driver's door opened with the soft metallic pop of well-oiled hinges. A man stepped out, shoulders broad under a black jacket, head ducked against the threat of rain, movements casual in the way of men who expect doors to open before they arrive. He turned toward the office glass, and even through reflection and gloom, she saw the jaw, the mouth, the eyes that had learned to promise too easily. He had shaved, the angles of his face were newly drawn, a week's road on his coat, the posture of a man who had found something he intended to keep. Grant Turner lifted a hand, nod. Quite a wave, mouth tilting into that half-smile her body remembered before her brain did. He looked past her to the corridor leading to room 6, as if a compass needle had been stitched under his skin and the house had become north. Behind Rachel, without touch, the office phone slid its receiver off the cradle and let it fall in a soft cradle of cord. The hiss filled the room like surf. The music box in the wall, impossible, wound itself and began to play. In the window's fog, letters scrolled, the lines slower, the hand that wrote it shaking with urgency. Do not let him hold the baby. The engine cut. The night waited. The office door handle gave a polite little test tug from the other side, as if someone had been taught good manners before they learned worse. Rachel's hand, still flat on Evelyn's letter, found that her fingers had made a fist around nothing but air. She was not ready, and she was also ready the way storms are. The baby turned in firm punctuation. Milo's low growl climbed, then narrowed into silence. The lock on the office door clicked once, lightly, as if deciding which side of history it wanted to live on. And from room 6, a tiny sound that was not memory, thin, high, newly alive, threaded the hallway, caught in the corner of Rachel's mouth, and would not let go. A baby's first, curious cry. Rain thickened into a hush that made the neon hiss sound like breathing, and Rachel Turner stood with one palm on Evelyn's letter and the other hovering above the office lock, feeling the baby tense beneath her ribs as if bracing for the shape that memory makes of a man. The dark sedan idled one breath, then died. Silence planked across the lot. Through the glass, Grant Turner lifted his chin the way he did when he wanted a scene to look like an arrival rather than a return. He had trimmed his beard close since she'd last seen him, the fresh shave at his cheeks turning his angles into declarations. Cheekbones knife-detailed, jaw hinged with determination rather than care. His hair, black thick and disobedient when he let it be, was slicked by the mist into obedient lines. Water glassed his lashes so his eyes, hazel gone cold, looked brighter than she remembered. He wore a black jacket cut to flatter a chest he had earned in gyms and arguments, a dark shirt, dark jeans, boots that remembered bar floors. He had the handsome that photographs love and people learn to distrust in rooms. It had worked on her once because it came with humor and hands that knew how to carry weight. And then it turned because something did inside him, an impatience ripening into entitlement, stupidity aging into strategy. The mouth was the same, half smile built to barter, never quite closing around apology. He glanced toward room 6 as if a compass needle stitched under his breastbone had swung to find it, then back to the office glass. And, whatever grace remained, left the night. Milo made a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a lock thinking better of itself. The phone receiver hung from its cord like a limp warning. The letters on the window, "Do not let him hold the baby," bled at the edges as condensation slid. But they held. Rachel slid the deadbolt with the quiet she used in hospital rooms when sleep was a medicine. Grant tried the handle, twice, politely first, then with the small insistence men call natural. His voice, when it came through the door, was modulated to neighborly. "Rach, it's me. Open up. You're hard to find when you don't want to be." That last part contained the seed of a threat he'd water later. She didn't answer. He adjusted as he did to tactics. "Okay, softer. Maybe I deserved that. I drove all night. We should talk." He rapped his knuckles, not hard. "I know about the place." A pause, the sound of him breathing a little laugh. "Of course you'd buy a haunted motel for a fresh start. It's poetic." He knew how to make mockery pass for intimacy. The mouth did it for him. Rachel felt anger arrive like heat, useful and clean. She stepped so he could see her clearly through the glass and shook her head once. She kept her voice low even. "We're done, Grant. There's nothing to talk about." He tilted his head in fake hurt. "You say that like we didn't build 10 years? Together. I could list the furniture." Another glance toward the corridor. "You alone out here?" She did not look down the hall, did not betray the angle of fear. "Leave. Or what?" A smile like a flint strike. "You'll call the sheriff?" "Call him." He tapped his ear. "I'll explain the texts you sent me last month." "I didn't text you," she said. "Maybe not with your fingers," he said, still smiling. "But someone from this number wanted me to know where you are." A flick of his phone screen sent blue light across his face, making him briefly alien. He held it up to the glass so she could see her own number in a thread she had not written. The last message, time-stamped that evening, was one sentence. "She wants to see you." A chill climbed her wrists. The motel liked to dial its own phone. It had learned. She adjusted her breath the way Briggs had taught her. Long exhale, anchoring. "You need to go." He nodded as if conceding a point in a debate he planned to win on cross-examination. "I will, after we do one thing that's not optional." He spread his hands, mock placating. "Let me put my hand on our child. Once. I won't take her from you." The pronouns slid oily. "I just want to feel her kick. I'm the father." The baby pushed hard against Rachel's palm, as if to underline the sentence on the glass. "No." He stared at her, confused, then amused he was confused. "You telling me no? That's new." He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging a little oval that sat inside the old warning. "Who told you things about me again?" Her answer surprised herself with how level it was. "My house." He laughed, genuine this time, because contempt gave him courage. "That tracks." He glanced left and right, the lot empty, and then stepped aside to survey the office frame, the plate glass, the old brass strike plate at the lock. "These places aren't fortresses," he said softly, conversationally, like a carpenter discussing door jambs. "They're invitations." "Grant," she said, once, not to persuade him, but to mark the moment before harm. Headlights swung into the lot. A second car rolled in with the steady tempo of people who drive the way they speak. Deputy Samuel Briggs parked the cruiser at an angle that wrote intention into the gravel. He got out without hurry. Rain limbed his short-cropped hair. The blue of his eyes looked gray under the sodium glow. He wore the uniform differently from some. No performative swagger, just fabric doing its job around a man who had learned to move without wasting motion. He carried a light in his left hand and his right rested near the holster. Not like a threat, but like a hand on a railing on stairs, you know by heart. "Evening," he said into the air, a greeting that accepted complications. "Something I can help with?" Grant turned, recostuming himself as reasonable. "Officer," bright smile. "We're fine." Domestic. Misunderstanding. "I'm her husband." "X," Rachel said through the door. Briggs didn't look away from Grant. Names? Grant Turner, Grant said. And my wife, Rachel. Turner. Owner, Rachel said, louder. Briggs's gaze slid to the glass, taking in Rachel's face. The stress white at the edges of her mouth, the cat on the counter, the dead receiver. He looked back at Grant. Mr. Turner, you were asked to leave? Asked is a strong verb, Grant said lightly. We're talking. You're trespassing, Briggs said. The voice was flat, but it carried the gravity of long nights. Step away from the door. Grant lifted both hands shoulder high like a TV extra staging compliance. Not a problem, deputy. He took 3 slow steps back, boots whispering in the wet gravel. The half-smile tried to keep its job. I just want to make sure my child is safe. You know how that is? Briggs glanced at the sedan, swept the light along the back seat and floor. The beam found nothing but a tool bag and the ash of too many cigarettes. He circled his attention back to Grant. Up close, he could see what Rachel always saw last. The little twitches that live in a jaw when a man is balancing the idea of humiliation against the reality of law. You can call family court, Briggs said, even, but you can't show up at night and demand access. Not here, not now. Grant's smile thinned. This town always this friendly? This town remembers fires, Briggs said, and something tightened in Grant's posture like a wire drawing. Is that a threat? It's a memory, Briggs said. Go. For a long second the scene held. 3 adults, a building that did not trust itself, the rain. Then Grant recalculated. He had always been good at that. He put his hands in his pockets and nodded toward the sign. Okay, I'll go, tonight. He turned to Rachel, gave her a look tuned to be read as tenderness by onlookers and as promise by the person it targeted. Tomorrow we talk like adults. This is my number. He slid a card under the office door and backed away. Sleep, he added, a small cruelty disguised as care. He got into the sedan, engine catching like a held breath released, and rolled out of the lot with a deliberate 17 sambishi that was a kind of insult. Briggs didn't move for 3 extra seconds after the taillights vanished. Then he walked to the door and stepped aside so Rachel could open it without feeling crowded. She slid the chain, cracked the door. His face, up close, had the pallor that belongs to people who choose to keep themselves from anger because anger stains the night in ways you can't mop up. You okay? Rachel nodded, because that's what women do when they are not okay, but intend to be. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. Get a second lock and consider a camera. I can set you up with a unit the county uses. She tried to smile. Add it to the list. He looked past her at the corridor. You still hearing? He gestured, shorthand for the things they hadn't named. From the room? Briggs. She caught his sleeve with fingers that wanted the rail. He said someone texted from my phone. The message said, she wants to see you. Did you? No. He absorbed that the way he absorbed weather, eyes scanning the wall clock, the window condensation, the vent cover drying on a towel, the lamb paper peeking from the panel's edge. House is a switchboard, he said finally. Or something's using it like one. Either way, it wants him here. He didn't argue. He reached into his pocket, took out a key with a cheap blue tag. Spare, Briggs. He set it on the desk. Lock up. Sleep in the office. I'll be in the cruiser at the county shed up the road for a few hours. You text. I'll be here before the message knows it left. His mouth almost smiled. And I'm logging a trespass report. Paper's boring, but it keeps stories honest. After he left, the motel exhaled, then inhaled again, but differently, as if it had learned something new about itself. Rachel went to the corridor and touched the cool edge of the nursery panel with the tips of 3 fingers, like checking a child's fever. The music box did not sing. The air past the seams smelled faintly of talc and heat. The baby had gone quiet, sunk into a sleep that made the skin at her belly seem thinner, as if light could pass through it if a lamp tried. She thought of the warning. Do not let him hold the baby, and how many meanings a single sentence could carry. Don't let him hold her, because he'll steal her. Don't let him hold her, because something will transfer. Don't let him hold her, because old stories pass through contact like a disease or a sacrament. She took the envelope with the hospital bracelet and Evelyn's letter to the counter, and read the last paragraph again, until the loops of the script looked like a map she almost recognized. If you find this, it means the room kept its promise longer than I could. Don't let anyone name you but yourself. A house can hold a child. A child should never hold a house. Near midnight, the power hiccuped, came back thinner, and she heard, or thought she heard, a laugh from far down the highway, the kind of sound that forks into two options in memory. She brewed tea from a grocery bag, the kind that claims to soothe, and sat with Milo in the pool of the desk lamp's light. He was a cat again. No messenger, no omen. 8 or 9 years, gray with white socks, one clouded eye watching the room as if subtitles had returned. When she stroked his head, he pressed into it with the whole weight of his face, a gesture that always undid her a little because it was trust, pure and stupid and therefore holy. She fell asleep in the chair by increments and woke 3 times because the rain rediscovered an angle on the roof, and the lights buzzed a pitch that invented a headache. At 2:07 a.m., the phone rang once, then twice. She stared at it until it stopped. At 2:12, a text from Briggs. Blue sedan at edge of county. Parked by old feed mill. Might be sleeping it off. Lock up anyway. She replied okay, and pictured his cruiser idling under a tin awning, the deputy counting seconds so she didn't have to. She closed her eyes and drifted. And when the motel nudged her awake again, the darkness felt closer to her face than it had been when she fell asleep. The softest sound found its way to her ear. The faint jingle of a metal charm against wood. A music box key bumping the shelf. She listened harder. It came again, not from the office, not from the corridor, but from inside room 6, and then another sound braided, a sigh, not hers, the door at the end of a day when someone has said everything they could say and nothing happened. Rachel stood, gathered the lamp glow with her like a shawl, and walked down the hall. She did not turn on the overhead lights. She did not call a name. She let the building know her by the way she moved. At the seam, the wallpaper felt cooler. The panel's temporary clips, Caleb's careful metal benevolences, looked undisturbed, but the floral repeat seemed a fraction off, as if night had tugged it. She placed her ear near the join. From inside the cavity came the smallest rhythm, the sound a sleeping newborn makes when breath is brand new and labor is a rumor. She closed her eyes against the flood of wanting and pressed the heel of her hand to her sternum to quiet the ache. Her phone pulsed. She stepped back, thumbed the screen. A new message, not from Briggs, not from any contact, just a number she didn't know, and a name it told itself, Margaret Wilson. For a second, the world shrugged, as if trying on a name that belonged to some other story. The text was short. I watched over you. Do not give him your child's first name. Bring the bracelet to the house. The nursery remembers the doorway the motel forgot. A link followed, an address pinned to a hillside outside town where map lines went faint. Rachel read it twice, and the second time the floor under her shoes felt like it wanted to be stairs. She typed back without asking how the number existed. Who are you? 3 dots appeared, blinked like someone breathing. The woman who knew Evelyn when rooms still had doors. I can prove what you already know, but not if he touches her. Names matter. So do hands. Milo lifted his head as if the text emitted a frequency cats prefer. The baby turned, a small roll that felt like a nod. Rachel looked at the panel, at the "do not let him hold the baby" fading slowly from the glass back in the office, at the night outside learning her rhythms, and decided that fear and hope use the same muscles. At 3:03 a.m., the motel lights flickered once more and steadied. In that small darkness, between blink and blink, the seam made a sound no wood should make. A wet suck, a gentle unfastening, and a draft the temperature of hospital corridors after the night shift washed her ankles. She took a breath to call Briggs and found she could not make a sound because the next noise, delicate and bright as a pin struck on crystal, rang clear. The silver rattle rolled out of the panel seam, struck the baseboard, and settled at her bare foot, still cool from a room that could not exist. She crouched, picked it up. The engraving, for my daughter, caught the little light there was and returned it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. He's at the mill. He won't sleep. He'll come back before daylight. Lock the door with a chair. And Rachel. The second text arrived before she could finish reading the first. There are 2 Grants in your story, the living one and the one the fire kept. The living one wants to finish the other's work. Rachel stood with the rattle in her hand. the baby naming the inside of her with feet, the nursery breathing like a held note behind a wall, and at the far end of the hall, the office door eased an inch as if an old woman had laid her palm against it and could not push. The metal of the deadbolt tasted the air. She turned to go and froze. In the office window, a reflection moved that was not hers and not the room's. A man's silhouette crisp at the shoulders, hatless, head cocked toward the corridor like listening for the noise a secret makes when it's ready to be born. The sedan's engine purred outside again, low and patient. The handle of the office door flexed under a hand that had learned politeness to hide insistence. The motel seemed to lean toward her, all the doors and vents and wires tugging the same direction, as if trying to teach her what home wants to be, in a world that keeps forgetting. She tightened her fist around the rattle until the metal pressed crescents into her palm, tested the weight of the envelope in her pocket where the hospital bracelet lay, and stepped toward the office, each footfall a syllable in a sentence she had decided to say out loud. No, you do not get to name us. The lock clicked. The door began to open. The chapter of the night turned its page without asking if anyone was ready. The night was restless. The wind howled through the eaves of the old motel like a wounded thing, and the walls of room 6 creaked as if remembering pain. Rachel sat on the bed, the photograph still in her lap. The cracked glass shimmered faintly under the lamplight, and the words, Rachel 1990, seemed to burn through the years and straight into her chest. She had stopped crying hours ago. What replaced the tears was something else, a quiet, fearful clarity. The reflection in the mirror had shown her what she didn't want to believe. The woman she had seen was Evelyn Holloway, and the baby in the photo, her baby picture, had been taken here, in this very room. She wasn't a guest who'd stumbled into a haunted motel. She had come home. Milo, the gray and white cat, lay curled at her feet. His cloudy eye flicked open whenever the wind rattled the shutters, his ears twitching. The air had grown colder since the apparition vanished. Rachel drew her trench coat tighter around her, her hands instinctively moving to her belly. The baby stirred, as if sensing her unease. I know, she whispered. I'm scared too. Unable to sit still, she rose and crossed the room. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not from a real fire, but from memory. She traced the floral wallpaper with her fingertips, feeling small ridges and cracks. In one corner near the ceiling, she noticed something blackened, faint scorch marks, hidden beneath a thin coat of new paint. She grabbed her flashlight, clicked it on, and moved closer. The burn pattern spread upward, branching like veins. Her heart pounded. The fire report she'd read said that the blaze started in this room, but it shouldn't have been standing if the fire was as bad as described. A sound came from outside, soft footsteps on gravel. Rachel froze. The motel should have been empty. Slowly she moved toward the window and peered through the curtain. In the dim wash of moonlight, a figure stood near the office, tall, wrapped in a coat, unmoving. She couldn't make out the face. For a long moment, the figure didn't move. Then, as lightning flared across the hills, it was gone. She blinked, unsure if she'd imagined it. Milo hissed softly, pressing against her leg. Rachel took a breath and forced herself to think rationally. Perhaps it was someone passing by. Perhaps the motel had drawn curious strangers before. Still, she needed answers. She turned toward the desk where the ledger and the photograph lay. Something inside her demanded that she find the truth. Not tomorrow, not later, but now. The next morning broke pale and brittle. The rain had stopped, leaving a sky as clear as glass. Rachel packed a small bag, wrapped the photograph carefully in cloth, and drove into town. The road was slick, bordered by wet grass and mist rising from the hills. She parked in front of the county library, a red brick building that looked forgotten by time. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust. Behind the counter sat a woman in her late 40s, thin, sharp-featured, with short dark hair and glasses that magnified her tired brown eyes. Her name tag read Margaret Lively. Rachel approached hesitantly. I'm looking for old property records, she said, around 1990, for the Sunrise Motel. Margaret looked up from her paperwork. Her tone was polite, but her eyes flickered with something else. Recognition, maybe fear. That's quite an old request, she said slowly. Not many people ask about that place anymore. Rachel nodded. I just bought it. I found some things. Margaret hesitated, then sighed and stood. Follow me. She led Rachel down a narrow corridor lined with filing cabinets, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Dust floated in the air like pale snow. They stopped before a tall metal drawer labeled Archives, County Property, 1980-1995. Margaret pulled it open and rummaged through the folders. Here, she said, handing Rachel a file. Last recorded owner, Evelyn Holloway. Rachel took the folder. The name felt heavy in her hands. She flipped through the papers. Most were routine, ownership deeds, tax forms, repairs, until she found a photograph clipped to a newspaper article. It showed the motel engulfed in flames, smoke curling into the night sky. The headline read, Mystery Blaze Destroys Sunrise Motel. Owner missing. The date matched her birthday. Rachel's throat tightened. She looked up at Margaret, who was watching her with quiet sympathy. Do you remember her? Margaret nodded faintly. I was a teenager then. Evelyn Holloway was kind, kept the place running even after her husband died. There were rumors that she was expecting a child, but no one ever saw the baby. Some folks said she'd been planning to leave town. Did anyone know why the fire started? Margaret hesitated, then spoke softly. There was talk of someone visiting that night. A man, maybe. Some said he'd been seen arguing with her. But when the police searched, they never found him. Or her. Rachel's fingers tightened on the folder. A chill crept through her despite the warm air. She thanked Margaret and turned to leave, but the librarian's voice stopped her. Miss Turner, was it? Rachel paused. Margaret's gaze softened. That motel? Some people say it burned twice, once in the world, and once in the heart of whoever goes there. Rachel didn't respond. She walked out into the sunlight, her head spinning. By the time she returned to the motel, evening had fallen. The light faded fast, leaving the sky streaked with violet and blue. She stepped out of the truck, clutching the folder against her chest. The building loomed before her like a photograph from another time. She unlocked the office and went straight to room 6. The door creaked open easily this time. Inside, everything was still. The photograph frame lay where she had left it, but the air felt different, charged. She set the folder down on the desk and whispered, Evelyn, if you can hear me, I need to know. A sudden gust of wind burst through the open window, scattering papers across the room. Milo darted under the bed, his fur bristling. The lights flickered, though she hadn't turned them on. And then, faintly, the smell of smoke again. But now it was mixed with something sweet, like lavender. Rachel turned toward the mirror. The reflection shimmered slightly as though heat rippled behind the glass. And then she saw her, Evelyn Holloway, the same woman from the earlier apparition, standing just behind her reflection, face calm and filled with sorrow. Evelyn's hair was dark and long, her eyes a soft gray blue. She wore the same pale nightgown as before, scorched faintly at the edges, the lace singed but intact. Her hands were gentle, but her eyes carried lifetimes of grief. Rachel's voice trembled. You were my mother. Evelyn nodded once, slowly. The mirror flickered again, showing flashes, fire in the wallpaper, smoke filling the halls, a woman coughing, crying out for help, clutching her pregnant belly as flames closed in. Then, a man's shadow dragging her toward the door, a scream cut short. The reflection blurred into darkness. Rachel staggered back, clutching her stomach. Who did this to you? She whispered. The mirror's surface clouded again. This time, a name began to write itself in faint, glowing letters. Grant. Rachel's breath caught. Her ex-husband's name. It couldn't be. The room spun. Grant had never been part of this place. He was cruel, yes, a man of charm and control, but he wasn't even born here, unless... The realization hit her like lightning. Grant wasn't just her ex-husband. He was the man Evelyn had tried to escape, a man whose violence had echoed down generations, finding her again in another life. The fire hadn't just killed Evelyn. It had trapped her spirit, binding her to this place, waiting for her daughter to return and break the cycle. Rachel's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, the photograph slipping from her hand. The room grew bright, the walls glowing as if firelight returned, yet no heat touched her. Evelyn's reflection stepped closer, placing both hands on the inside of the glass. Rachel mirrored the motion. For a moment, their palms aligned perfectly. Mother and daughter separated by time, but joined by recognition. A whisper filled the air, gentle and warm. "You were never lost, my love." Tears streamed down Rachel's face. "Neither were you." Then, slowly, the mirror cleared. The scent of lavender deepened. The burned wallpaper smoothed itself. The cracks sealing. The photograph frame on the desk glowed softly, and the baby's face within seemed to smile. The motel sighed, a long, tired breath, and the chill lifted. When Rachel opened her eyes again, the mirror showed only her reflection. The air was warm, the light steady. Milo emerged from under the bed and leapt onto her lap, purring softly. She looked around. The room no longer felt haunted, just empty, peaceful. Rachel rose, opened the window, and breathed in the clean night air. In the distance, dawn's first light began to bleed across the horizon. She whispered, "Rest now, Mom." And as the morning came, the old neon sign outside flickered once more. The broken letters glowed whole for the first time in decades, spelling out their full name, Sunrise Motel. In the quiet aftermath of every haunting, there's a question that never fades. What keeps a soul bound to a place? Sometimes it isn't the curse, it's love, unfinished and misunderstood. Rachel's journey through the Sunrise Motel reminds us that even the darkest walls can hide a mother's prayer, and even fire cannot destroy what God intends to save. Miracles don't always come with light or angels. Sometimes they come in the shape of courage, a woman who decides to stand her ground, protect her child, and face the past that made her. If you believe that faith still lives in forgotten places, then whisper a prayer tonight. For mothers who guard in silence, for children who grow under grace, and for every lost soul still waiting for forgiveness. May God bless those who watch this story, and may His mercy find you wherever you are. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, comment, and share so others can feel the same light. Let's keep hope alive together, and may God's hand guide your night.